often wonder how we ended up in a situation of discussing high valued men versus the wants, the needs of women. And it almost seems like we're all enemies now, men and women, black men and women. I can only attest to the things I've seen, the things through my own experiences. I spent a lot of times talking to females on the phone. Probably about 91. That's when, we had the little puppy love situations where, I mean, the game used to be, it wasn't, we didn't have to come up with a whole bunch of, uh, you know, magical words to talk to a female. It was just, my thing used to be, you have a boyfriend? Can I get your number? And, you get the number and you would call her, and some people would be awkwardness depending on how I felt towards the girl. So I'm going to change names a little bit. And I'll just use first names, okay? So there would be like Judy, Alexis, Alicia, Lakia, Christine, Melissa. And we would just talk, and some, depending on who it was, it might be more religious conversation, or it might be the dating scene or whatever. And I would have to preference this by saying that somewhere, I would say around 12, 13, I decided that I was going to read the entire Bible. I had been in the church all my life. I got baptized at 12, and that's a whole nother story, but I wanted to get baptized because the church would segregate the baptized and unbaptized people into separate groups every, I think it was every so many Sundays or every Sunday or whatever. And literally, like, you had to go sit, if you were unbaptized, you had to sit in the unbaptized section. So my mom was baptized, and she would go, sit in her section, and I would have to go sit at like 10, 11 years old. I have to go sit in the other section. And the section that was baptized, they got to eat a wafer and drink grape juice. And I wanted to eat the wafer and drink grape juice too. So that's why I got baptized. Nobody told me the seriousness of it. It was just, oh, if you feel that's what you want to do, just go do it. So anyway, getting back to the story, I didn't understand the Bible. And oftentimes at 9, 10 years old, I was just wondering why they were praising Jesus. Who is this Jesus character? Literally, that was my question. So, like I said, some things were going on in my life. I didn't realize until later, rather traumatic things, but I decided that I'm going to read the whole Bible from beginning to end. And one of the conclusions after I had finished, I determined that there would be no sex until marriage. And this was around 92, 93. So I entered every interaction with women, with females, with girls, with that mentality, which makes dating very complicated, because like everything you get into or you enter into, you have a plan, right? You should have a plan. There should be okay, road trip. I get into the car, I go get some gas, make sure the tank's filled up, and we're going from point A to point B. And in that journey, everything should lead me from point A to point B, right? So you think that way about a relationship. But when there is no sex, there can't be marriage. Like I said, I'm 12, 13, 14. You're not ready to get married as a man, as a woman, as a female. You pretty much are, apart from your mental situation. Everything else is there, but a man, you have to have a career. You have to have a house. You have to have stability. You have to have, I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play to get married. So you're nowhere near where you need to be. So what is dating for? It's just pastime. It's just something that you do. And of course, popularity, it's popular to have the girls. I mean, we were in elementary school and we used to have free time where we would all sit in our, our groups, the nerds, the artists, the free spirits, and essentially the guys from the hood. We had our own little group, and we would talk about, not necessarily me, I would listen more, but they would talk about all their sexual exploits. And this was in third grade, fourth grade. I banged this girl, I did this, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, man, we was running trains on this girl. And, we would talk about, I mean, we would talk about other things, but, that was one of the big things. And it made you feel like you were somehow inadequate, left out. There's something that you weren't privy to, sort of outcasted when you're telling the truth in your mind. And you're like, I haven't had these experiences, but these guys are telling stories that later, of course, you realize their older brothers or their uncles or, the older guys around the neighborhood were, these are their stories, and they're just kind of retelling them as though it's them, right? But it puts inside your mind that having a girlfriend, being in a relationship is basically what it is to be a man, right? So with that in mind, fast forward back to 96. I mean, years. I mean, I would, so-and-so would call and my dad would tell me, so-and-so's on the phone, and I would go talk, and we would talk for hours, and if I recall, I would talk to females more than I would talk to dudes, and they would have soft voices. I don't know what their intentions were. I mean, I knew that certain females liked me. And there was one girl that I used to talk to all the time. She would call me every day. And I was in a relationship with her friend. This was in 94, 95. I was in a relationship with her friend, but me and the girl I was in a relationship with, we would kind of like just breathe on the phone. We would just, I would call her and it would just be silence. And I would ask a question and she would give me a one word answer and silence. And okay, well, all right, it was nice talking to you. When we would come to school, we'd kiss, we'd hug. She bought me a gift for, I believe it was Christmas, like before Christmas. It was weird, but I thought it was kind of normal because when I really liked a girl, I didn't want to mess anything up. So I would kind of be silent. But her friend, I was never really attracted to her. And I swear she used to call me at least once a day to the point where I kind of got annoyed by it. And my mom would tell me, she's on the phone, and I would, oh, okay, I gotta do something. I'll call her back, And she would have the sweetest, softest voice though. And after years of her calling, like I said, physically, I was not attracted to her at all. But I always got the sense that possibly this was a sign from God that, you better talk to her because you're not, she's the one. And I would get that in the future with other females. And our conversations, like I said, would be anything from religious, I have allergies, just cut the grass and I'll probably be sick for a couple of days, but it would be anything from religion, politics. And people used to tell me I had a pretty good mind. I was intelligent. So I kind of ran with it. I would try to look up as much as I could, try to understand as much as I could. So yeah, we'd have a lot of conversations, and I mean, even me and family, like I would talk to them a lot of females. My my mother's sister had what was it, 3 daughters. One was like 2 years older than me, and I used to hang out with her and her friends most of the time. They had one son who was like 5 years older than me, so his life was, a little different. But me and the cousin, we used to hang out a lot. And like I said, I was privy to a lot of conversations because, I was like the kind of like the little brother, but just kind of like the brother. And it was almost like they would forget that I was in the room type of thing. They would just talk. And like I said, I would get a lot of insight into how females thought, what they believe, their interpretation of things. And never had any animosity towards black females. Save one, and I'll leave that alone. But I understood that this one female was completely different, and their mental state was a little off. But I compartmentalized that. I realized that it was that female, and never had any animosity. And until I started to get a little bit older, and I started to see that, what I had understood from my Bible perspective, that a woman's position was to be chaste, and basically she was the one who guarded her, her privacy, and kept men away, and the men were supposed to try to get in, and and that was just thrown out the window when I started to see how sexually active a lot of females were in our community, right? But I would still have just general conversations. I knew there was one girl that physically she was perfect, but once, and in fact, she was a cool person, and something, I don't know if it snapped, I don't know what happened, but or maybe it was just the personality that was really her started to come out. And she would tell me about, the guys who she did something with, and it was like two or three, dudes at the party, and she took them all upstairs, and it was just like, and it was just like, okay, well, I can look past that because you're still a cool person. I still like you, as a person. You know what I mean? I knew that pretty much there was no relationship possible there. And like I said, around that time, I started to question the whole reason for me getting into relationships, because they could never go anywhere. I mean, like I said, we didn't have social media. We didn't have multiple streams of income. We didn't have, I mean, basically you get a job at Kmart and you earn your I think 625, when I was like 16, 17. I got a part-time job at a grocery store. And yeah, I think I was making like 625 an hour, and that was it. And at that time, I'm making money. I had a car. My dad sold me his car. I remember he had that car when I was in elementary school. So that was in like 80. So it was probably like a 10-year-old car. And he sold it to me for like $200. I bought it from him. So I had a car. I had a part-time job. In my mind, I'm making moves, I'm living. But in reality, and even in my, there's one part of my mind that said I'm doing big things, and then there's another part of my mind that says no, there's no way I would be able to, take care of a person other than myself with this, this income. So what do you do besides puppy love, and that feeling you get when you're in a room with her, and that little tingle, that little nervousness and the butterflies in your stomach, and you kiss and you hold each other, and then where do you go from there? What do you do? And like I said, I had determined about 12, 13 years old, no sex, none, until I get married, which I didn't realize how messed up I would be later on, with that. But so you still have the desires, right, to be in a relationship and just to have a female in your life, and like I said, it started early with us. I mean, like I said, we're like 8, 9, 10 years old, like sitting around in our groups at school and just talking about, our sexual exploits. And like I said, I was quiet, but, you didn't want to look like a weirdo, right? So you would try to get in, but I didn't know anatomically, probably until 11, 12 years old. I didn't know where things were on them. I didn't understand how it worked. So, I didn't want to get into, I didn't want to make myself look stupid. You know what I mean? Like yeah, I turned her over, and then, I was, you know, like I thought it was all one area down there, right? I thought everything. Anyway, the point is, um, you didn't want to embarrass yourself, so you were kind of quiet. But at the same time, if you're too quiet, then everybody knows that you probably didn't experience anything, and you weren't sure if these guys were really actually doing the things that they were saying. So that got confusing, and I would kind of just go off and draw Ninja Turtles and pretty much read books and something, do something by myself. But the point to all of this is how things changed and came to uh, this place where we have you rest in peace, Kevin Samuels, and how we have a high value man and high value lifestyle and low. I guess there has to be a low value, which is why I didn't really co-sign the whole Kevin Samuels and this whole movement with Fresh and Fit and all this other stuff, because everybody seems to involve the amount of money as the only way to have a decent relationship. The point is, things changed drastically. And I kind of want to take you on a journey of my experience of how things changed and see maybe if anybody else has that same understanding. 1996, no, like I said, males and females in my circle, the people I observed had good communication, good relationships. And I remember being on the phone with around 94, 95, certain group of females, right? And we used to talk, laugh, joke, have a good time. I mean, you know, I've had females cry and tell me that, they just want a relationship. They just want to be with somebody. They don't want to be old and single. I was talking to one girl, I was like 20, I think at the time I was like 27. And this is around the time when, I should have been really considering getting married. But by this time, I saw that marriage probably wasn't the best idea. So I was about 27. She was about 34, right? And we were talking, and she literally just broke down and cried to me and said that, she's in a family where pretty much it's all females and they're all single. And this was, let me see, 27. This would be about 2000. What was that? 2007, 8. And she told me that, like, everybody around her, her aunts and her sisters, they've all been single. Her grandma, everybody was just single all their life. And it's because she believed, because they were strong and independent. And she once told me that she had literally, like, she said she had standards. And she started running down some of the standards. And I was like, and I was joking with her, and I was like, so you have like number, like, I think I said, I don't remember the number, but I said, you have like number 2006, he has to be this. And she said, yeah, I actually do have that. And I was, so essentially she had a book of standards that a man has to meet, and he has to meet every single one of them before she could even consider being in a relationship. I wasn't exactly physically attracted to her. And most of my actual girlfriends, like the girls that I was really, really, like the really pretty, like at the time, pretty, had a certain definition. I mean, usually lighter complected, like light color or hazel eyes, long, curly hair, just that was my standard at the time for some reason. And I think that was conditioning, because I remember I was at a basketball tournament. I was not playing, though I was good at basketball years ago. Um, there were these twins. And I swear, when they say blue black, these girls were like chalkboard black. And they were identical twins. And they were the most beautiful females I'd ever seen. So I never really had a specific type. I guess it was just how the features fit. But early on, I think the training was light skin, long hair, light eyes, kind of, biracial, essentially. That mix of European blood had to be there, that type of thing. So those type of females, I was very scared to talk to. And a lot of times, if I did get their phone number, it would be, the interrogation question. I would be very quiet. It would be the breathing, and it would culminate in, and okay, I'll call you back. And it was like, as you got older, you kind of learn that means that's over, you know. And then it was I would say, the more approachable females, you know. I would have long conversations with and love talking to. And there was one female that absolutely I wasn't attracted to, but I actually thought about talking to her at one point because she was so cool. She was one of the coolest people I ever talked to. So anyway, getting back to the point, how things change. All right, there was one female. She was, now I didn't know how old she was. I knew she was a little bit older than us, but she was from the neighborhood. And at the time, she had three daughters who were all under, I believe they were under 10 at the time when we were like associating, right? And we had found out that her baby daddies were all under 18. Okay. Put a pin in it. So we were really cool. You know, like all of us were really cool. She used to call me, her and her friend, my mom used to, you know, my mama used to babysit her friend. They used to call me and like I said, I was probably about like 14, 15. No, I think at this time I was like 13, 14, 14, 15, somewhere around there. And they used to call me and like tell me the stuff they were going to do and blah, 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 this and that, and, you know, whatever. And I didn't see a problem with it. I mean, if it was the reverse, of course, that would be an issue. You know, like it just in society, that's an issue where you have two men calling a 13-year-old and, you know, telling her what she's going to, you know, like that would be an issue. But for me as a male, I didn't see it as a problem. I knew how to handle it. It was just like, but I also had it in my back of my mind, you know, of course, their penthouse, that would be a beautiful situation, you know, uh, just have a threesome and everything else. But in the back of my mind, I always stuck to that I have to wait until I get married, which was very frustrating, very anger inducing. And like I said, later on, I didn't realize how much that would mess me up. All right. Come to find out, I think I was about 17 when I found out that she was 38. I don't feel like doing all the math, so you can do whatever you want to do with it. The point is, we were all cool. And she would, apparently, her MO was to have younger men's children, younger males' children. And they used to all just sit around the house. And, like, I mean, if we got, like, me and one dude used to always get suspended. We went to two different schools, but I would get suspended at my school. He would get suspended at his school. And so we would just walk around the neighborhood during school hours. And, you know, so we would end up over her house and some other people's house who either got suspended or just didn't go to school or whatever. And her house was like the hangout, you know, for a lot of us. Then we had other situations we would get into, whatever. And basically, the point is, she was a cool person. My understanding is she didn't have a job. She had three daughters, and she lived at her mom's house, and she was always there. And that was kind of typical. You know, the kids would just be with, you know, they didn't pursue baby daddies. I don't think, you know, legally she would want to pursue them. Child support, I didn't realize that was a thing since probably time immemorial. But it wasn't really enforced and it wasn't really a big deal, right? They didn't look. I didn't know what they did before. I didn't know how they made money. I didn't know any of that. My dad did give me, like, he would just talk to me out of the blue. And he would just start a conversation. It wasn't even a conversation. It was just basically telling me something. And then he would finish his statement, and that was it. And there was no leeway, segue. There was no, like, lead up to it. It was just like, so we were sitting in the car one day, and he just started telling me about how these women move. I guess that was the whole thing. And he used as an example an elder family member who had a lot of children and supposedly raised all these children by herself. And he said, how do you think that happens? And I was like, I don't know. So he told me about the welfare system. And he told me about how basically the man was removed, not even removed. He said when you have poor people, and historically, I mean, we can argue race, we can argue, the financial dynamics of the racial groups and whatever. But when you have a poor people who can't make ends meet, regardless of what they do, how much they're working, and you have a popular idea that everybody should have children, that it's God ordained to have children, and it's also a blessing to have children. You're going to have children, and they're expensive, and you're poor, right? So the government comes along, and they have a program, which I didn't realize later was more for wives of soldiers. But welfare comes into play, food stamps comes into play, government assistance comes into play. So the government, so they learn that the government can take care of you, but one stipulation: you have to be single, because it was meant for male soldiers being at, in combat or overseas, and women had to basically spend the time raising the children. Somebody got an idea that this can be used for poor black women, right? Who? Don't know. Was it the women themselves, or was it some outside entity who knew how this was going to play out? Don't know. So the men basically voluntarily left the households at this point, because as a man, I am trying everything to take care of my family, and I can't make ends meet. And it becomes what is later used in the court system as in the best interest of the children, which is tongue in cheek, right? Whatever it takes to make sure my kids can make it, and my wife can make it. My the woman I've loved can make it. I'll step out, be it if it's divorce or if it's, they were never married or whatever the case may be. The man steps out, the woman gets every, government benefit possible. It was not a malicious thing when it started. It was really sincerely to figure out a way to have the best possible life for the children. Fast forward, it became a party in the projects to, get pregnant, have babies. It was just automatically understood that the government would take care of you and the babies, and the men go on and do whatever they do, be it have another family or just forget about the kids or but that's not how it started. So when you used to see back in the 50s and 60s, I think it really hit the black community in the 60s. But the program was around a lot earlier than that. The welfare, will take care of a single woman if she has children type of thing. That started way before that. And I think it just became a way of life. It was just like, if I get her pregnant, I step off. It was just a natural thing to do. She's taken care of. She can live in the projects, which was a beautiful thing for poor black people in its inception. It was a haven, a safe place for women and children to thrive, whatever that meant. Set up by the government. Nobody had to be burdened with high rent, and all the man had to do is kind of step back. You can see how this is going to go bad, even if you don't know what's going on right today. And this is when I used to have good conversations with females. It was just like, it was very easy going. It wasn't like you could approach a female on the street, even if she didn't have children. And it was just like, you're like, oh, a man is approaching me, and, we can talk, and, but now, later on, when we get into it, it was, what you want from me? What are you trying to get? Like it became more of a seedy transaction just to have a conversation with a female, right? It was just like, oh, you want something. Like, what do you really want? Blah, 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 this and that. It became a more contentious environment later on. So, okay, fast forward. So we have 1996. Bill Clinton introduces, and I wish our people can see how I'm not going to say the Republicans are any good, but the Democrats have done a lot of, okay, they've done a lot of horrible things to us. So Bill Clinton institutes this 2 years get off of welfare, which is not a horrible thing in and of itself. But the way it was structured, it was essentially you have 2 years to stop living how you have been accustomed to for the past, is it 1996? So we'll say the 36 years, right? At least. You have 2 years to make a drastic change to be able to basically fully take care of yourself and your children and these kids. And people didn't limit how many kids I mean, usually it was around 4, 3, 4, 5, but they didn't really limit like based off of finances, because the government was doing it, right? The government was taking care of them, so they didn't even realize how much these kids cost. You have 2 years to make that drastic change. So the girl that, just picking any of them, one of the females I was talking to earlier, they got a job at Kmart or, some fast food joint. And they would work their 40 hours and they made their 625 because that was I believe that was the federal minimum wage at the time. I think it was 625 or 615. I'm not even sure. But I know when I first started working at 16, I was getting 625 an hour. And so I'm just going to assume that's where they started. And there wasn't really a problem because that sense of freedom came into play. That sense of now I can actually buy my kids what I want, because there's a lot of restrictions with welfare, especially with food stamps, on what types of food you can buy. You can't buy hot food. You can't. I mean, like I didn't realize this until I had a child that Similac is actually on the WIC list, but Enfamil is not. And there's some debate about that as well. There's certain things you can't do when you're on welfare, of course, that you can do when you have a job. Now you have the freedom to, have anybody in your house or have a man live with you, or, like there's a lot of things that seem trivial to us now, but then it was a sense of freedom, right? And like I said, I was making the same thing they were making back then. I was making like 625. I might have made like 650 at a couple jobs or whatever, but we were all making the same thing. I didn't see a problem with it because, like I said, I'm 16 years old, 17. I think it's 16. I started working when I was 13. I was, getting paid. And 16 is when I officially got a worker's permit. And like I said, I got a job. My dad would not allow me to get a job until I was 17 because he wanted me to focus on school. So as soon as I was able to get a job, I got one. And I was working at a supermarket, bagging groceries, getting carts. I hated the job. By this time, I had a lot of social anxiety. So that made me feel very uncomfortable. I didn't realize how much it triggered, like there was a lot going on. But I love the fact that I was earning money. So we're all starting off at the same point. And I believe that these women, girls at the time, some of them girls, some of them 16, 17 years old, I believe that a lot of them started to realize that it still wasn't enough, because now you have these kids who nobody's supporting but you. And I think it took a while for it to hit them. So you had 2 years to get off of welfare, right? So about 98 is when they started working low-end jobs. Same jobs I was working, right? I think that's when it hit them. So then they started to reconnect, or a lot of times they never stopped connecting. They never stopped talking to their baby's dads, right? But now the conversation starts to change. It's like, well, I do need a little bit of help. Whereas 2 years prior to that, I don't need no man. It was just like, you can do your thing because we both have an understanding that the government is going to provide for the kids. Now, when that bottom drops out, it's like, I do need you. That puts a heavy burden on a man who never intended to take care of a family. And I don't say this in a malicious way. I don't think these guys were just like, you were for the streets and I just basically knocked you up by accident. Whoops. I think that sometimes these kids were, planned. And this whole situation was planned because the system had gone on since, like I said, for the black community, it's gone on since the 60s, with the projects and with the, with the welfare and food stamps. And this program was going on since the 60s. So why should anything change? Well, the government changed it, and the Democrats changed it, and Bill Clinton changed it. And so about 99, you know, like Pac said, you start knocking on the door, then you start banging on the door, and then, you know what I mean, then you break it in, you know what I mean. And so it was like they caught her baby dads, and they need a little bit of help, and it's like, then some of the baby dads would stop answering the phone and run away, because I mean that's a brand new responsibility. And for anybody listening who says, well, that's just the way it's supposed to be when you're an adult and you make the adult decision, you have to look at it like the coddling from the government that had been going on for so long. And anything you get into, when the floor is taken out from under you and you just drop and now you're in reality, it's a shock. So they're knocking, they're asking, baby daddies, can you please help me? And the baby daddies probably were working some of the same jobs I was working. Like they didn't have any money. And, we can get into a debate, but I believe that a female of any race is considered more manageable and more usable in the public sector than males of any race. But when you get to black and brown, I think they would rather have the females than the males, right? So it might have been harder for them to get the same 40 hours a week, or it might have been harder for them to get the same amount of jobs, whatever the case may be. It was time to run away. It was time to not answer the phone. It was time to, now she's starting to press me for some money. So the most logical thing to do is, when you're stuck making minimum wage, because most of these females they didn't go to college. They didn't, they didn't have any work experience prior to that. So you're stuck making minimum wage, right? And then you go to the baby daddies and they're not answering the phone anymore. They're running away. Some of them stepped up and, decided that, that is the right thing to do. Let me get 2, 3, 4 jobs. Let me try to make it. Some of them decided to go to the streets and start making money, illegal ways. But a lot of them just couldn't hang, right? And if you start making it illegal ways, if you don't have a plan and you haven't been in this for, decades or whatever else, or you're not in the mafia or whatever else, you have more of a chance of getting caught up. So some of these guys got locked up, right? Juvenile detention or state, whatever, federal charges, whatever. So they're not around anymore. So the females still can't get the help that they need, essentially. They go to the nice guy. The guy who was always there on the phone and, who was there listening to their problems and, just having conversations, and never really asked them for anything because he's too nice to. And they can't just say, can you start taking care of somebody else's kids? You know what I mean? It's like, that's kind of too straightforward. So it was more, like I used to get things like my kids kind of look like you. It was desperate attempts, but, it was like, why don't you come through, you know what I mean? And I think, because I didn't learn this until I was about 30, that if, at least under certain states' guidelines for child support, if you start to take care of a child for a certain amount of time, and I don't know exactly how long it was, or how long it would be, but if you start providing a great deal of financial support for a child as a man, you become locked into being the financial provider according to the court system. And when I found this out, I immediately went to an elder family member who you would think would tell you that, given their position in your life. And they said they knew. And that kind of, there's certain conversations you should have with your male children early on. And that probably is one of them in America. And if they're an American citizen anywhere else in the world, you want to have that conversation early on, because you think you're doing nice things as a nice guy, right? Uh, it's a child who needs diapers and needs formula and needs to go to the movies, and you're just doing a nice thing. And then the next thing you know, you get paperwork in the mail that states that, let's just say you and her fell out, the mother of the child. Now you get this paperwork in the mail that states your obligation continues for 18 years. And if you don't, you go to jail, right? Nobody told me that. Nobody tells us that. So the nice guy who was smart enough to understand the possibilities of the situation, even if there was no legal obligation to continue, just the mere fact that I'm paying for a child that oftentimes I told females to stop having so much sex in our conversations prior to 1996 or 1998 rather. And it was like a joke to them. A couple of them was just like, haha, like, nah, I like it. It's too fun. You know what I mean? You need to start having sex and blah, 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 this and that. And it was like, okay, well, I can't, we can, because I like you as a person. You're a good person. And yes, there's a couple of them, a few of them that I really like wanted to have those intimate moments with. But like I said, I made this commitment, which I don't know exactly why. There's this, there's an idea that fornicators and idolaters will not inherit the kingdom, and all this other stuff. So that was my whole thing, and for some reason I got caught up on this. I got caught up on it, and it was like, if I were to do this before I got married, God was going to punish me. And I don't know where that exactly came from, but it was accumulation of the ideas, and it was a lot of other things too. It was about selling poisons to the community. It was a lot of different things that I just believe was just wrong. It's just evil, and it was wrong, and I can't do it. Not evil in the sense of me condemning you and calling you evil, but me stating for myself that it would bring curses to myself. And sex was one of them before marriage. So I would just tell them, like, maybe you should slow down a little bit, you know what I mean? And there was one, she got pregnant. We were still cool. I actually took her out on Valentine's Day. And before you call me a simp, I knew, like, number one, we went to a Chinese buffet. Okay. It wasn't a lot of money, but I knew the situation that she was in. And I really cared about her as a person. And it wasn't it wasn't about trying to get the draws. It wasn't, because I made it perfectly clear to her that unless we got married, this wasn't going to happen. But at the same time, I liked her as a person. And I'm sure we can't comprehend that today. And essentially, she became somewhat like, almost like a family member, but at the same time, we used to kiss, and I thought heavily about it before, I thought about it because she was special in my heart. There were some things behind the scenes that she would come. Like, I never used to go to the cafeteria because I went to so many different high schools. By the time, like, I switched high school so much that I never really got a comfortable group of friends, and by the time I got to 12th grade, I just wanted to get the hell out of high school. And I just kind of wanted to, like, basically focus on my studies, go to college. Possibly I wanted to be a special education teacher. There were some reasons why I wanted to go down that path. And I started to get a sense of, like, purpose, like the saying in the 90s of you were probably going to be dead before you're 21, and the understanding that was a very real possibility, and not looking towards the future or anything, or not really, I want to be a aerospace engineer and I want to be retired by the time I'm 35 and all that. I didn't think about any of that. I thought about basically part of me was suicidal. I wanted to get out of here. I didn't want to be a part of this place anymore. And grudgingly, I would get through, year after year of school. And grudgingly, I would get, keep a job. And grudgingly, it was just like, I wanted to get the hell out of here. I hated this place. So when it came time that I could possibly graduate, I just wanted to focus on school. I never used to go to the cafeteria. And the few times I did early on, this is when this girl sent, well, her friend came over, and her friend was absolutely not. She was, I mean, she was attractive, but she was not what I was looking for. A little, like, tight, like, skimpy dress, and the light eyes, but it was clearly contacts, and the big eyelashes and the big weave. And I was just like, okay, what is she coming over here to do? And she came over and sat down, and she was like, do you have a girlfriend? And I said, no. And I was about to follow up with, I'm not really looking, which I wasn't. And she told me that her friend was interested in me. And I'm thinking, okay, why doesn't her friend come over? And I look over, and she was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, tall, fashion model look, you know what I mean? Just pretty. And I'm like, okay. Now, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking that maybe one day when I get myself in order, I could get married to somebody. And I didn't know who she was at the time. So I'm like, okay, well, tell her to come over. And, there's nothing else to do. We're at lunch. Might as well entertain a conversation just to see where it can go. And she was a very cool person. And I'll leave it at that. So I stopped going to the cafeteria. Why? Because I just didn't know anybody. I knew a lot of people there, like my family had gone to that school for generations. I know a lot of people just from other encounters or whatever, but like I never really had close bond relationships with people because, and it was my fault. I got kicked out of a lot of high schools. I got into a lot of trouble. So it was my fault, but at the same time, I never built those relationships. So I started, I had a teacher, and she said, I guess she sensed, or maybe I talked to her, I don't know, no. But she would tell me to come to sit in, I could go sit in her room. Now she would, go do whatever she was doing, and basically just left the door open and said, you could come eat lunch here. And that's what I did for a long time, even before I met her. So once we met, we used to go into that room, and she would just lay her head on the desk, on my desk after, like I would eat my lunch, and then she would come after she would eat. And then she would just come and lay down on the desk, and, sometimes fall asleep in my arms. And I was writing poetry at the time, and she would sit there and listen to the poems. And I wrote a story one time. I tried to write a horror story, and she told me it gave her nightmares. I don't know if that's true or whatever. But she was very supportive. That's a key word. We're just going to lock that in. Supportive. And then she started to open up to who she really was and how she was wilding out, and she would go to the clubs and shake her booty and blah, blah, blah. And she was having sex with this dude and that dude and whatever. I don't know if she was saying that to try to get under my skin. It didn't work because I didn't see her that way necessarily. Like I was just trying to smash, and, and I knew I could. She made it perfectly clear that I was welcome, but it was just like, and it creates a whole bunch of tension, eventually. But with her, it wasn't any tension. It wasn't, but she did end up getting pregnant. And we were still cool. And I did take her out for Valentine's Day. And, yeah. So anyway, you fast forward, we did end up falling out. And it was because of Valentine's Day. Because when I took her out, we had a good night. I took her home. Everything was cool. I think we even watched the movie when we got back. Everything was cool. She calls me about a couple hours later and tells me that there's a dude that thinks that we slept together, and he wants to know if we slept together, basically. And I'm like, first of all, what we did or didn't do is our business. I don't know this dude. You're not married to this dude. And essentially, he just wanted to find out if she was smashing. And I'm like, I don't know if this dude is some dude who thinks he's her boyfriend, because I know she talked to a couple different guys. I wasn't worried about it. Back then, you could come see me if you want to. I don't think it would have been in your best favor, but he wasn't trying to come see me. He just wanted to find out what she was doing. And I'm like, that's a problem between you and him. So she told me that because he didn't believe her, she gave him my phone number. She was like, well, you can ask him. Here's his number, blah, blah, blah. She's telling me this. So I'm like, okay, that's not something that you do. She couldn't see that. She gave him I think she said she gave him my address for some reason. I'm like, this is not things you do. And that's when I realized that mentally she probably wasn't ready for a friendship, relationship, or anything. So I basically cussed her out. I said, you don't give people my personal information that I don't know to verify if you're sleeping with somebody. Like, that's kind of, she couldn't get it. And I did get, I'm a Leo, but I'm not a Leo. You know what I mean? I'm very calm, very compassionate, very, but at the same time, the, the, the roar can come out. So it did come out with her, and I chewed her the hell out. So she has her cousin call me, female cousin. So she's on the phone trying to explain what the other girl did and why she did what she did. And I'm like, I'm not trying to hear any of that. So I ended up chewing both of them out, right? And at the time, I'm still living with my parents. So, they're barking at me. I'm barking at them. I didn't want to go to the level of where I thought it needed to go. Like, basically, people needed to be put in check because you're giving out my personal information to strangers. And I just wanted to calm the whole matter down. So my mom knew her, like I said, she had become a friend, to the family. So my mom knew her, and that was the only other woman that I knew could probably calm the situation down. So I put my mom on the phone with her, and I told her, like, these chicks is wilding out. And my mom talked to her, and she did calm down. But it was just, at that point, it was like, maybe we need to kind of separate, because you're not mature enough to handle this friendship apart from all your sexual exploits and craziness that you got going on. So we stopped talking. Years later, I see her. Now, this is, 90, probably like, that was 99, maybe 2000. So I see her probably like 2004, 2005, somewhere around there at the bus stop. And I was like, what's going on? And, how have you been? Whatever. And she was like, I don't need nothing but money and my kids taken care of. And this is all she said to me. And I said, okay. So I stepped away from her. So the sentiment, the idea that the mental state started to change. And I look at a group. I don't just look at an individual and say, well, this person's mindset changed, but the group, like the easiness of the conversation and everything started to change. Like I said, about 98, then it became, and I remember like each female that I was talking to would say the exact same thing. It was almost like they had some kind of meeting where this was where we are now. And it was, y'all niggas is dogs, except for you. You're a cool one. And I was like, okay. All right, well, as long as I'm still cool with you, that's all that matters, So it was like, okay. And then it became, y'all niggas are dogs without the, except for you. And it was like, well, what about me? And I was like, I would say that. And it was kind of, well, you're probably one of them too. And then it became, y'all niggas ain't shit. And it was like, okay, where's this coming from? And then it became the separation of or the compartmentalized the different groups of black males. So it was like you were either on the down low, that was a big thing. You live with your mama, which I still did. You're in jail, or you're with a white woman. And then a couple of them got interchanged. It was like it's either you're on the, but the down low always stayed there. You live with your mama. And then the next one would be incarcerated. And then the last one would be either you're taken by, I guess, either a black woman or whatever, or you're what I later, I guess, what was later termed the incel. You don't deal with women or whatever the case may be. And then that last one turned into you hate black women. So those were the only categories that a black male could be in, right? Meanwhile, they would still talk to you. You could still, I mean, if you wanted to, like they were really down to smash for some reason. And I don't know if that was using the P to get you to take care of the kids. I don't know what the whole thing was, but it became this thing. It's about my kids. And if you ain't gonna be there for my kids, then you don't need to be around me. And that's when I really stepped back because, like I said, I hadn't even had a sexual experience, let alone am I going to just instantly jump into taking care of you and your kids, like multiple. I knew at that time, hypothetically, how much one child cost. They were saying like $1 million at that time, which I'm sure is well over that now. But I knew I didn't have myself stable enough to Like I said, this is 2004, 2003. No, this was before 9/11. This is 2001. That women were females were basically, they don't like to be called females now. I don't know what you get, but they were basically coming at me like, if you're not down to take care of my kids, then you need to step back. All right. And these are the same females that I was talking to years before, that we used to have those conversations. They used to tell me all about, their periods and their cramps and I learned so much about women through these females. And we used to talk about, just like hopes and dreams. We used to talk about, now it was just like, nigga, I ain't got time for you unless you about my kids.